She booked a trip to forget her ex, but ended up in her boss's room. And he couldn't let her go. She booked a trip to forget her ex, but when she opened the hotel room door, her boss was already inside, wearing nothing but a towel and looking at her like nothing would ever be the same. Isabel thought this trip would help her heal. Just a quiet weekend to breathe again, to finally let go of a love that never loved her back. But that night, in that room, wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something she never saw coming. And in the end, she would discover that sometimes real love shows up when and where you least expect it. Before we continue, if you enjoy touching and inspiring stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, let's get back to the story. Wait, someone's already in here. Isabel's voice caught in her throat the moment she stepped into room 417. Her suitcase wheels stopped abruptly on the carpeted floor, and she froze. The soft hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, but what made her heart stumble was the sound of the shower running behind the bathroom door. Someone was already here. A jacket, gray, neatly folded, rested over the arm of the chair. A leather wallet and keycard sat on the table by the window, and there was a faint trace of cologne in the air, clean, fresh, expensive. Panic began to crawl up Isabel's spine. She stepped backward toward the door, fumbling for her phone. Had the front desk given her the wrong key? The confirmation clearly said room 417. She glanced at the room number again just to be sure. Her fingers trembled slightly. Before she could dial reception, the bathroom door clicked open, and that's when she saw him, Edward Hale, her boss, wearing nothing but a white towel around his waist, hair damp, eyes wide the moment he saw her. "Isabel," he asked, stunned, water still dripping down his temple. "What are you doing here?" For a second, neither of them moved. Isabel's stomach dropped. Heat flooded her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then somehow forced words out. "They gave me this room," she said quickly, trying not to look at him, or more specifically, not to look at his chest, which looked very unlike a man who spent most of his days in meetings. "Room 417, I booked it 2 weeks ago." Edward ran a hand through his hair, looking equally confused and mildly embarrassed. "Same here. I just checked in 30 minutes ago." An awkward silence stretched between them. Isabel instinctively hugged her arms around her chest, still standing halfway in the doorway like she was ready to bolt. This was so not how her quiet weekend getaway was supposed to start. She had come here to forget, to breathe, to let go of Mark, the man who didn't fight for her, the man who made her feel like a burden instead of a choice. The man she'd finally left 3 months ago after 5 years of waiting for something real. This trip was supposed to be hers, for herself. But now, she was in a hotel room with Edward Hale, the man who signed her paychecks, the man who barely said more than 5 words in meetings, but whose eyes always seemed to carry stories he never told. The man who kept his distance, but never felt cold. She swallowed hard. "I'll go back to reception and sort it out," she said quickly, stepping back toward the door. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to barge in." Edward's voice stopped her, quiet but calm. "Wait." She turned. He looked down, then back at her, as if considering something carefully. "It's late, and they might take hours to fix this, if at all." His tone was thoughtful. "Do you want to... would you mind just staying until morning? We can call them in the morning. I'll sleep on the couch." Isabel blinked. Share a room with him? "No pressure," he added quickly, catching her hesitation. "Really, if you'd rather go downstairs, I'll come with you." She hesitated. She really should say no, but the thought of dragging her suitcase back downstairs, dealing with front desk confusion, and possibly getting bumped to a worse room made her sigh. And strangely, deep down, a tiny part of her didn't want to leave just yet. Not out of attraction, not yet, but curiosity, and maybe something else. "Okay," she said finally, her voice soft. "Just for the night." She changed into her pajama shorts and cotton t-shirt in the bathroom while Edward sat silently on the couch, scrolling through something on his phone. When she came out, the bed was made meticulously, with only one side turned down. He'd even left a glass of water on the nightstand. She gave him a small, grateful smile. "You can sleep. I'll stay up for a while," he said without looking at her. "There's an investment call in Europe I need to check on anyway." She nodded and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The lights dimmed. The only sound was the hum of the city outside the window. Minutes passed. Isabel stared at the ceiling, her heart still beating a little too fast. And then, out of the quiet, he spoke. "Do you think people know when they've broken someone, or do they just move on without noticing?" She turned her head toward him. He was still on the couch, legs stretched out, arms resting casually, but his voice was nothing like his usual composed self at work. It was cracked around the edges. "Sometimes I wonder," he continued, more to himself now, "how long someone's supposed to wait before it stops hurting?" Isabel sat up slowly. She wasn't expecting this, not from him. And something inside her, that quiet, bruised place that Mark left behind, suddenly understood him. "I think," she said gently, "some people break others without even realizing it, and others, they know exactly what they're doing. But the ones who get broken, they're the ones who remember." He turned to look at her. His eyes were darker in the low light, but still impossibly clear. "How long did it take for you to stop remembering?" She didn't answer right away, because the truth was she hadn't stopped. "I'm still trying," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward nodded once, as if that made perfect sense to him. And in that strange silence, not awkward this time, but deep, something shifted. They were no longer boss and employee, no longer strangers in a hotel mishap. They were two people, each carrying something they didn't talk about, until now. Edward stood up suddenly, walking toward the window. The city lights reflected off the glass, casting soft shadows across his face. "I didn't come here for business," he said after a long pause. "I came here to forget someone, too." Isabel's breath caught. "Who?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Edward turned his gaze back to her, eyes softer now, exposed in a way she'd never seen. He hesitated, then said quietly, "You remind me of her." Isabel didn't know what to say. The words floated in the space between them, heavy and personal. More personal than anything she'd ever imagined hearing from Edward Hale, her boss, the untouchable figure at the head of the company, the man who could hold a room with silence, who rarely looked up from his laptop unless it mattered. And now he was here, in a hotel room with her, saying this. She pulled the blanket tighter around her legs. "Was she someone you loved?" Isabel asked softly, careful not to push too far, but unable to stop the question. Edward turned back to the window, hands in his pockets. "She was everything," he said, "and I lost her before I ever got the chance to say that." There was something broken in his voice, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, like someone who'd learned to live with pain by folding it neatly and hiding it away. He sat down on the edge of the armchair, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't look at her. "I met her during college," he said, eyes focused on some distant memory. "She was the first person who ever made me feel known, like she saw through everything I tried to hide, my ambition, my pressure to succeed, the walls I built after my father left." Isabel listened in silence, her breath shallow. She was warm, kind, funny in that way that made you feel like the world was still a good place, no matter what. He let out a short, dry laugh. "And I didn't know how to love her back the way she deserved. I thought success had to come first. I thought there'd be time later." His voice tightened. But time ran out. She wanted to ask what happened, but she didn't. Maybe because she could feel he wasn't ready to explain, or maybe she already knew enough that she was gone, and that her absence still echoed in him. Isabel shifted in the bed, leaning forward slightly. "Do you still think about her?" He nodded once. "Every day." There was a long pause, and then, softly, he added, "And then you walked in tonight." That sentence hung in the air like a question neither of them dared answer. Isabel looked away, pretending to fix the blanket, even though her heart was racing. He didn't mean it that way, she told herself. He's tired, emotional, vulnerable, but still, something had changed. She glanced at him. He looked back. This wasn't just a hotel room anymore. The next morning, Isabel woke to the smell of coffee. She sat up slowly, blinking at the sunlight filtering through the half-closed curtains. Edward was standing by the small kitchen area, dressed now in a white shirt and dark slacks, sleeves rolled up, pouring coffee into 2 paper cups from the in-room machine. He looked different, more relaxed, like some invisible weight had shifted on his shoulders. He handed her a cup without a word, and she accepted it with a grateful smile. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "Surprisingly." "Yeah," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. They sipped quietly for a moment, the air between them still holding traces of last night's honesty. Then Isabel looked at her phone, a single message from Mark. "Thinking about you. Can we talk?" She stared at it for a long moment, her stomach twisting. Edward noticed her expression but didn't ask. He simply walked over to the window again, giving her space. After a few seconds, she turned the phone face down. No reply. She looked up at Edward. "I don't know why I ever waited for him. Mark, I mean." Edward glanced over, brows slightly lifted. She continued, "He never really saw me, not the way I needed, not the way I think I see myself now." He nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we chase what's familiar, even when it hurts." She met his eyes. "And sometimes we find something real when we stop chasing." Their gazes held for a beat too long. A knock at the door startled both of them. Edward stepped over and opened it. It was the front desk clerk, young, nervous-looking, holding 2 new keycards. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hale and Miss Bennett. There was a booking error. We've arranged a separate room for Miss Bennett now, just down the hall." Isabel stood, heart stuttering. "Of course," she said quietly. Edward took the card from the clerk and closed the door gently. There was an awkward pause. "I'll grab my things," Isabel said, moving toward her suitcase. Edward didn't stop her, but he didn't move either. As she zipped up her bag, her fingers trembled slightly. Why did it feel like something was ending when it had barely begun? "I guess I'll see you back in the office," she said, forcing a small smile. He nodded, hands in his pockets. "Yeah, Monday." She walked to the door, then hesitated. "I meant what I said last night," she added softly, without turning around. "Sometimes the person we need is the one who sees through the mess." He said nothing. She walked out, and the door clicked shut behind her. Isabel stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall just outside her new room. She stared at the card in her hand, feeling something she couldn't name. Behind her, the door to room 417 remained closed. Then, a soft sound. She turned. Edward was standing there in the hallway, still barefoot, eyes fixed on her. "I should have said something before you left," he said, voice low. Isabel's breath caught. He took a slow step forward. "I don't think this was an accident." Edward's voice lingered in the hallway like something fragile and true, waiting to be acknowledged. Isabel stood frozen, her fingers still gripping the keycard to her new room. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear but from something far more dangerous, hope. She turned slowly to face him. His eyes were steady, calm but undeniably vulnerable. "Edward," she began, unsure what she was even about to say. He took another step closer, the hallway silent around them, just a stretch of carpet, 2 people, and a moment neither had planned for. "I know we work together," he said quietly, as if acknowledging the first unspoken wall between them. "I know there are lines. But if I let you walk away from that room without saying something real, I'd regret it." She swallowed hard. "Last night," he continued, was the first time in years I felt like I could breathe, like I didn't have to keep performing. And it wasn't the place. It wasn't the silence, it was you." Isabel's throat tightened. She wasn't used to this kind of honesty, especially not from someone like Edward. Men like him were supposed to be invincible, controlled, untouchable. But right now he looked anything but, and she felt seen. Like every quiet part of her heart that had stayed hidden through the years with Mark was finally stepping into the light. She took a shaky breath. "I didn't expect to feel anything either, not after what I've been through." "I know," he said gently. "But I did," she whispered. Another pause. Then she looked down at the keycard still in her hand, the new room that waited just a few feet away. The safe choice. But when she looked back up, Edward was still there. And suddenly she knew. Isabel walked past her room, not even glancing at the door, and stopped in front of him. She held up her card. "So what now?" Edward looked at her, a little stunned, a little relieved, then opened the door to room 4117 again. And this time, she walked in by choice. That afternoon, they spent hours not talking about work, not talking about anything heavy, just laughing. Isabel hadn't laughed like that in a long time, the kind that made your stomach hurt and your guard fall without warning. Edward, it turned out, wasn't just the quiet, brooding genius in the corner office. He had stories, embarrassing ones, about college pranks, about failing his driver's test 3 times, about his obsession with badly made action movies, and she told him about her grandmother's porch swing, about how she used to write poetry no one ever read, about how she still hadn't figured out what happiness was supposed to look like. But she was tired of pretending she didn't care. They sat on the carpet by the window as the light faded, sipping tea instead of wine. He never tried to touch her. She never moved away. Something was building, slow, steady, and real. And in the middle of it all, Isabel realized something. She wasn't afraid of being close anymore. Not with him. That night, just before she turned off the light, Edward said something that stayed with her. "You know, I used to believe love had to be complicated, that it had to come with pain, like it didn't mean anything unless it broke you a little." She looked at him, surprised. "And now?" she asked. He hesitated, then smiled softly. "Now I think maybe love is supposed to feel like this. Quiet, safe, like a room you never want to leave." Her heart swelled, but she didn't say anything. Not yet. She just smiled back and turned off the light. The next morning, Isabel woke to a note on the nightstand. "Had to step out for a call. Coffee's on the counter. Didn't want to wake you. You looked peaceful. E." She smiled at the handwriting, neat, careful, slightly slanted to the right. She stretched slowly, sunlight warming her skin, and for a moment it felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Then her phone buzzed. Mark again. Another message. "I'm in town. Just want 5 minutes." Isabel stared at it, pulse quickening. She hadn't heard his voice in months. She didn't want to. She had finally started to move on, hadn't she? She looked at the door. Room 417 suddenly felt both like a refuge and a crossroads, and deep down she knew something. To truly move forward, she might have to close a door that had stayed open too long. Cliffhanger ending. To Part 3. Edward returned a few minutes later, coffee in hand and hair slightly windblown from the breeze. "Morning," he said warmly, stepping inside. But Isabel was already dressed, and the look in her eyes was serious. "I need to see him," she said quietly. Edward blinked. "Mark?" She nodded. "I just need to know that the past is really over before I keep writing something new." Edward's jaw clenched slightly, but he nodded. "Then I'll be here when you come back." Isabel looked at him for a long moment. "I hope you are." She left. And this time he watched the door close. Isabel sat across from Mark at a quiet cafe near the beach. the kind of place couples used to go when they wanted to talk without raising their voices. But there was no romance here now, just steam rising from 2 untouched cups of coffee and a wall of memories she no longer trusted. Mark looked the same, that same tousled hair, that sharp jaw, the expensive watch he always wore too tight on his wrist. But his eyes, they were different, tired, almost nervous. "You look good," he said after a beat, trying to sound casual. Isabel didn't answer right away. She was too busy studying the way he said it, like she was still his somehow, like she owed him something. "Why did you want to see me?" she asked softly, keeping her voice steady. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers laced. "I've been thinking about you a lot, about us. I made mistakes. I know that." He paused, waiting for her to say something. She didn't. "I took you for granted," he continued. "I thought you'd always be there, and when you finally left, He exhaled sharply. "I didn't expect it to hurt this much." Isabel blinked slowly, absorbing his words like someone listening to a song she used to love, familiar but hollow. He reached across the table, his hand grazing hers. "I've changed." Her stomach turned, not because she still loved him, but because she didn't. Not anymore. And that scared her a little, because for so long Mark's silence had filled her. Now that he was speaking, she felt nothing. "I waited for you, Mark," she said quietly. "I begged for you to let me in, to fight for us, and you didn't." "I was scared," he said quickly, his tone rising. "Scared of depending on someone, of losing control." She nodded slowly. "I know." And then she pulled her hand away. "But I'm not scared anymore, and I think that's the difference." Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is this about someone else?" She looked down at her coffee. "This is about me." Edward sat on the balcony of room 417, one leg crossed over the other, his laptop open but untouched. He'd read her message an hour ago. "Just coffee, I'll be back soon." No emojis, no signs of nervousness. But still, his stomach wouldn't settle. He didn't want to be the rebound. He didn't want to be the placeholder for someone else's unfinished story. But more than that, he didn't want to hope. He'd done that once, and it ended with silence and a hospital hallway. Still, something about Isabel felt different. Not perfect, not easy, but honest. When the door clicked open, he stood up quickly. Isabel walked in, her eyes softer than when she left. He searched her face for signs of regret, of confusion, of something unsaid. Instead, she gave him a look that calmed everything in his chest. "I'm here," she said simply, and that was all he needed. Later that evening, they sat barefoot on the hotel bed, knees touching, eating take-out Thai food out of paper containers. Isabel laughed at how Edward couldn't handle anything spicier than mild curry, and he threw a pillow at her when she teased him about it. There was lightness now, but underneath it, something real was still simmering. "I told him goodbye," Isabel said suddenly. Edward looked up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "For good?" She nodded. "There was nothing left. I just hadn't realized it until I saw him." He watched her carefully. "And how do you feel?" She thought for a moment. "Lighter." Then she looked at him, her voice more cautious. "But I don't want to run from one thing just to fall into another. I don't want this to be a moment that fades when we go back to our real lives." Edward nodded slowly. "Neither do I." He set his food aside, then turned to face her fully. "I'm not offering you a distraction," he said. "I'm not even offering a fairy tale. I'm offering me, as I am, complicated, quiet, still figuring things out." Isabel felt a lump rise in her throat. "And I want you," he added, "not just in this room, but when the emails start piling up, when the deadlines hit, when life gets loud again." Her eyes burned, but she smiled. "I want that too," she whispered. He leaned in, not rushed, not desperate, just close enough to let her decide. And she did. She closed the gap, Their lips met, soft, unhurried, like two people finally choosing each other with both feet on the ground. It wasn't the kind of kiss that promised fireworks. It was the kind that said, "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, Isabel sat in the airport lounge, her suitcase by her feet, her phone buzzing. She had a flight back to the city in 1 hour. Edward had left at dawn for a meeting. They promised to talk soon, to try. But just as she stood up to board, her phone lit up again, from HR. "Hi, Isabel. We need to speak with you as soon as you land. There's been an internal concern raised about your trip." Her blood ran cold. She looked around the terminal. Suddenly, the world that had felt so warm and safe last night felt like it was closing in again. Was this the price of choosing something real? Isabel sat stiffly in the back of the cab, city lights blurring past the window. Her phone rested face down in her lap, but the message from HR kept echoing in her head. "There's been an internal concern raised about your trip." Concern? That word, so vague, so loaded. Her heart thudded in her chest, every worst-case scenario flashing through her mind. Had someone seen her and Edward together? Had Mark said something? She hadn't told him about Edward. But if someone at the hotel had talked, or if a photo had leaked, this wasn't just about her feelings anymore. This was her job, her reputation, and Edward's. The elevator ride to the office felt longer than usual. People passed her, smiling, nodding, chatting about spreadsheets and deadlines, as if nothing had changed, but everything had. As she approached the HR director's office, her legs felt heavier with each step. Michelle, the director, was already waiting inside, middle-aged, polished, but not unkind. She gestured for Isabel to take a seat. "Thank you for coming in right away," Michelle began, hands folded. "I just want to clarify a few things before this goes any further." "Further?" Isabel asked carefully, her voice low. Michelle offered a measured smile. "It's not disciplinary, not yet. But we received an anonymous message through our ethics channel. It mentioned a personal entanglement between you and a member of executive leadership, specifically during a company-paid trip." Isabel blinked. "It wasn't a company trip." "I know," Michelle said. "But Edward Hale was listed as traveling for business, and the room was partially billed through his executive expenses." That hit Isabel like a punch to the chest. She had no idea. Michelle paused, giving her space to respond. "It was a mistake. The room. We were both assigned the same one by accident," Isabel explained, her voice clear but shaken. "Nothing inappropriate happened." Michelle's eyes searched hers. "You're not in trouble, Isabel. But if there's a conflict of interest or a romantic involvement, we have to document it, especially when it involves someone in Edward's position." Isabel's breath caught. Romantic involvement. How do you define something that's only just beginning? Later that day, Isabel sat alone in the break room, staring into a cup of cold coffee. She'd left the HR office with a formal reminder about company policies and a sinking feeling in her chest. She hadn't even spoken to Edward yet. He'd been in meetings all day, unreachable. She didn't even know if he had gotten a message like she had. And she hated that suddenly, what had felt beautiful and private. Now felt exposed. The door creaked open. Isabel didn't even need to look up to know it was him. Edward's presence always shifted the air in a room. He walked in slowly, closing the door behind him. "They talked to me too," he said quietly. Her eyes flicked up to his. "I didn't say anything." "I know," he said. "I didn't either. But I told them I'd speak with legal about formally disclosing something, whatever this is." Isabel looked away, frustrated. "I didn't want this to turn into drama." "It's not drama," he said, stepping closer. "It's risk. But it doesn't mean it's wrong." She hesitated. "Is it worth it?" Edward studied her. "You tell me." The question hit harder than she expected. She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted to say it. But years of keeping her head down, of avoiding office gossip, of surviving on stability, made her hesitate. "I need time," she whispered. Edward nodded once. "Then take it," he said gently. And he left. No guilt, no pressure, just space. That weekend, Isabel took the train to her mother's house just outside the city. She hadn't been there in almost 6 months. The garden was overgrown but familiar. The wind chimes still clinked near the porch swing. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming to an old jazz song, wearing that same apron with the tiny tea stains on it. They sat at the table drinking tea, talking about nothing, until Isabel finally broke. "I think I'm falling for someone," she said suddenly. Her mother looked up, surprised but calm. "That's good, isn't it?" "It is, but he's my boss, and now people know, and I feel like if I choose him, I'm giving up everything I built. But if I walk away, I'm giving up something real." Her mother leaned back, stirring her tea. "You know, your father and I met at work," she said with a small smile. "He was the new head of maintenance. I was the receptionist. People whispered. Some didn't like it, but love doesn't wait for approval." Isabel felt tears prick at her eyes. Her mom reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "The question isn't if it's complicated, sweetie. It's whether it's right for your heart and whether you're both willing to face the world together when it stops being easy." That night, alone in her childhood bedroom, Isabel opened her laptop and started typing, not an email, a letter. To herself? She wrote about the version of her that waited too long for someone who never showed up. She wrote about the girl who hid her hurt just to look composed. And then she wrote about the woman she was becoming, who was brave enough to choose what scared her because it also made her come alive. Monday morning. Isabel stepped off the elevator and walked down the hall with a new calmness in her chest. She stopped outside Edward's office. Inside, he stood by the window, looking out over the city, hands in his pockets. She knocked once. He turned, startled. "I'm ready," she said. His brow furrowed. "Ready for what?" She stepped in, voice steady. "To stop hiding and to start something real." Before he could respond, someone cleared their throat behind her. She turned. It was Michelle, and the company's legal advisor. "Sorry to interrupt," the advisor said. "We'll need both of you in the conference room. There's been a formal investigation launched." Edward's face hardened. Isabel's breath hitched. She took a step closer to him, her voice low but strong. "Whatever happens, I'm not walking away." The air in the conference room felt colder than usual, too bright, too still. Isabel sat at one end of the long glass table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Edward sat beside her, calm as ever, but his jaw was clenched, like he was holding something back, like any wrong word could cost more than just his title. Across from them were Michelle from HR, the company's legal advisor, and a third woman Isabel didn't recognize, someone from corporate compliance. No one smiled. The compliance officer began, her tone clinical. "We're here to discuss a possible violation of company policy, specifically a non-disclosed personal relationship between a senior executive and a direct report employee." Every word landed like a stone in Isabel's stomach. Edward leaned forward. "Before you begin, I want to make something clear. Isabel has never received any professional advantage because of me. We didn't start anything romantic until after the hotel incident, which, by the way, was a booking error, not a plan." Michelle raised a hand gently. "This isn't a trial, Edward. We just need the facts, and then we can move forward." The compliance officer nodded. "To protect both parties, we'll need an official disclosure signed by both of you. If this is an ongoing relationship, company guidelines require Edward to step down from direct oversight of Isabel's team. There's also a potential review of past promotions. To ensure fairness." Isabel felt her chest tighten. She glanced at Edward. His face was unreadable. "And if we don't disclose?" she asked, barely above a whisper. There was a pause. "Then we'd need to investigate further," the legal advisor said carefully, "which could lead to disciplinary action or termination." The word hung in the air like a threat. Edward looked at Isabel. "I'll sign it," he said. Everyone turned to him. He looked calm, certain. "I'll step away from her department," he continued, "whatever it takes. I'm not risking her reputation or her position." Isabel blinked. "Edward." He reached under the table and gently touched her hand, just for a second. Subtle, private, but real. Then he turned to the table. "Let's move forward." They walked out of the conference room in silence. No one said anything until the hallway cleared behind them. "Are you sure about this?" Isabel finally asked. "You worked so hard to get where you are?" Edward stopped walking and looked at her. Really looked. "I'm not giving anything up. I'm choosing the thing that matters more." Her throat tightened. "You didn't even hesitate." "I did," he admitted softly. "Back when I lost the first person I loved, I hesitated too long, and she was gone. I won't do that again." Isabel swallowed hard. "What happened to her?" He hesitated, then he exhaled. "She was sick. Cancer. She didn't tell anyone until it was late. I was too busy chasing meetings and metrics. I missed the chance to just be there." Isabel's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "It's not about pity. It's about learning. When someone shows up in your life and makes you feel alive again, you don't ignore that, even if the timing is messy, even if the world doesn't approve." Isabel nodded, her heart full. But just as they turned the corner, they saw someone waiting near the elevators. "Mark." Isabel froze. Edward's eyes narrowed slightly, protective now. Mark stepped forward, hands in his pockets, looking strangely out of place in the clean, glass-walled office. "Hey," Mark said, "I'm not here to cause problems." Edward didn't speak. Isabel took a slow breath. "Then why are you here?" Mark looked down, then back at her. "Because I realized something. When I saw you walk away from me, it hurt. But when I saw you, with him," he motioned toward Edward, "I didn't feel angry. I felt replaced. And I think that's what I really needed, to finally let go." Isabel studied his face. It wasn't bitterness in his eyes. It was acceptance. "I hope you're happy," Mark said, his voice quieter now. "And I hope he fights for you the way I didn't." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away. Isabel stood there, stunned. Edward slipped his hand into hers, and for once she didn't feel torn. She felt free. The following days were a blur of transitions. Edward officially moved out of her department. Whispers came, of course. Some people stared, others speculated. But Isabel kept her head high. And Edward. He didn't disappear behind closed doors. He still smiled at her in the hallway, still texted her articles he knew she'd love, still made her feel like this wasn't just a phase, but the beginning of something stronger. They started walking to the train station together after work. They shared headphones, playlists, dinner leftovers. It was quiet, but meaningful. And for the first time in years, Isabel wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was standing in it, living it. One night after a long day, Isabel sat curled up on Edward's couch, flipping through a book while he worked quietly beside her. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face changed. Isabel watched him closely. "What is it?" she asked. He looked at her slowly. "My ex's sister," he said. "She reached out, said there's something I need to know about Sophie." Isabel felt her heart slow. "Sophie," she repeated. "The woman you lost?" Edward nodded, eyes distant now. "She left something behind, and I think it's about me." Edward stood silently on the steps of a small brownstone tucked away in the quieter part of the city. Isabel stayed a few feet behind him, watching his hands clench and unclench at his sides. He hadn't said much during the ride over, just that Sophie's sister, Emily, had called asking to meet. Isabel wanted to ask 1,000 things. What was this about? Why now? Was he okay? But she didn't. She knew this wasn't her moment. It was his. So she just stayed beside him. He finally reached up and rang the doorbell. Emily answered within seconds. She looked older than Edward had described her, not in age, but in eyes. the kind of tired you don't get from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying memories that never left. "Hi," she said, her voice soft. "Thanks for coming. You must be Isabel?" Isabel nodded. "It's nice to meet you." Emily nodded, then turned to Edward. "Come in. There's something I think you need to see." Inside, everything felt frozen in time. Pictures of Sophie lined the hallway, smiling, holding a sketchpad, standing on a pier somewhere with wind in her hair, a presence that still lived inside the walls. Emily led them to a quiet den where a wooden box rested on the coffee table. "She left this with me," Emily said, her voice cracking slightly. "She told me to give it to you when I felt like you were ready to let go of the guilt." Edward sat slowly, his eyes never leaving the box. Isabel stayed back, her breath caught in her chest. He opened it carefully. Inside were 3 things: a folded letter, a small silver key, and a photo. Edward and Sophie, arms around each other, laughing, pure joy, frozen forever. He picked up the letter and began to read. "Dear Edward, if you're reading this, then I guess Emily believed you were ready. I know you. I know how long you hold on to things you can't fix. And I also know that letting go doesn't come easy to you, especially when you believe you failed someone, but you didn't fail me. You gave me peace. You gave me love in your own quiet, imperfect way. You gave me memories that made my last years full of meaning. I never wanted you to carry guilt. I wanted you to carry hope, which is why I'm giving you this key. You remember that old studio I used to dream about turning into a gallery? You bought it for me, and then let it sit empty when I got sick. I want you to open it. I want you to fill it, not with my work, with yours, with your second chance, with your future, and maybe, just maybe, with someone who makes your silence feel like music again. Love, Sophie." Tears rolled silently down Edward's cheeks. He didn't speak. Isabel slowly walked over and knelt in front of him, resting her hands on his knees. He looked up at her. "She forgave me," he whispered, "before I even asked." Isabel nodded, her voice trembling. "And she gave you permission to live again." He closed the letter and placed it gently back in the box. Then he looked at Isabel, truly looked at her. She was right. "You know," he said softly, "you make my silence feel like music." Isabel smiled through tears. "So, what will you do with the key?" Edward glanced at it, then back at her. "I think I want to create something, not just for her, for me, for us." 3 months later, the old studio had transformed. What once was dust and silence now glowed with soft lights, wooden beams and warmth, paintings on the wall, photographs of real moments, a quiet corner with a piano, a table for 2 with chipped mugs and a plate of cookies someone forgot to put away. It wasn't a gallery. It wasn't even a business. It was a space for being. Edward called it the room. In quiet tribute to 417, Isabel stood in the doorway, wearing a soft blue blouse, her hair tied back loosely, watching guests mingle and laugh at the small opening night event. She wasn't nervous anymore, because she wasn't pretending anymore. She was living. Mark had sent one last message a month ago, a simple wish for peace, and an apology that no longer carried weight. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Michelle and the team had adjusted. The whispers faded. Respect returned, because Isabel never stopped doing the work, and Edward never let power speak louder than love. Later that night, as they cleaned up the last few dishes, Isabel turned to him. "Do you ever think how strange it was? That one mistake, that hotel error, changed everything." Edward smiled as he stacked glasses. "Maybe it wasn't a mistake." She leaned against the counter, tilting her head. He walked over, wrapped his arms around her waist, and kissed her forehead. "Maybe," he said, "it was exactly what we both needed." 1 year later, a soft snow fell outside the windows of the room, and laughter echoed inside as friends gathered for a winter charity night. Isabel adjusted a set of hand-painted cards on the donation table while Edward stood beside her, wearing his usual calm expression. A little girl tugged at his sleeve, pointing to the piano. "Can you play again?" Edward looked down at her, then at Isabel. She nodded, smiling. He sat down and began to play. Nothing fancy, just a simple, quiet melody. And Isabel stood by the window, arms crossed gently, watching the man she once thought she'd never know become the man she couldn't imagine life without. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. And in the end, that was all that ever mattered. The end. Sometimes the wrong door opens up exactly the right story. The real love stories aren't always loud. They begin in broken places, in quiet rooms, and in moments that don't look like fate until they do. Your turn. Have you ever walked through a door you almost avoided and found something that changed you forever? Share in the comments. Your story might just be the one someone else needed to hear.